Welcome to the Mayo Clinic Human Optimization Project, where we're creating the blueprint to help you become the best human you can be. I'm your guide and fellow optimizer, Christopher Camp. Today, we're talking about a word that many people don't like to discuss. It's often surrounded by a lot of negative emotions, frustrations, judgment, and insecurities. One of the reasons for all these negative connotations is that there's also a lot of misunderstanding that surrounds this word. And we all tend to fear that which we don't understand. So, what is this word I'm talking about? The word I'm referring to is calories. So, our session today is titled Understanding Calories, What They Are, What They Do, and How to Get Them Right. Our hope is that we can put a lot of the myths, frustrations, and confusion to rest for you today. To help us accomplish that, we have Jason Ewalt, who is a registered and licensed dietitian at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. Jason, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Glad to be here, Dr. Camp.
So, Jason has a master's degree in human nutrition. He's a certified sports specialist dietitian. He's an instructor in nutrition at Mayo Clinic and is also board certified in obesity and weight management. He's been helping athletes, patients, and teams achieve their nutritional goals for over 13 years. And Jason's worked with everybody from the weekend warriors to the professional athletes. So I think he's in a good position to help us out today. To help get us organized, we have our three big questions that we're going to structure the discussion around. The first big question is, what are calories and why do they matter? The second is, why do people often misunderstand calories and why is it so hard to get this right? And then our last big question, what can I do to figure out my caloric needs and actually stick to them? Jason, does that sound like an okay plan of attack for you?
I think so. Let's do it.
Okay. All right. Well, we do appreciate you being here and helping us cut through this. I know there's a lot of confusion that surrounds this, and it's one of those things where we all know a little bit, but none of us know everything. And we all sort of come in with different amounts of information and education. And then you sort of layer on the emotional component to this and the willpower component. So there's all these added layers and it can get pretty complex. So let's start simple here, just with some definitions. And maybe if you would, can you first give me a scientific definition of what a calorie is? And then maybe follow that with a practical definition for folks.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're thinking of calories from the scientific definition, at its core, it's essentially the amount of energy required to raise 1 kilogram of water 1 degree Celsius. So, what it effectively looks like is they take food and they put it in what's called a bomb calorimeter, and they essentially blow it up and they measure the heat given off by the water temperature. I don't know that you would ever need to know that, short of if you're on a trivia game. The practical definition that we would use is simply just the energy in food and beverages. So the amount of
Perfect.
calories found in food and beverages.
Good. So it's a measure of energy essentially, and it's how we get from. So tell me, what are our most, and you sort of alluded to this, but where do our calories come from?
Yeah. So when you're thinking of calories, calories are coming from our macronutrients in food. So there's three, for all intents and purposes, that are essential. We have protein, we have carbohydrates, we have fat. So protein and carbohydrates each are about 4 calories per gram. So you have a gram of protein or carb, it's 4 calories. A gram of fat would be 9 calories. So this is where, thinking back to like the 1970s, essentially, where we found this and we said, gosh, this is the ticket to weight reduction and correcting obesity. We just have to make everything low fat. So at that time, that's where all these low fat products came out, thinking that we were going to reduce calories because it is almost, well, just over 2 times as calorie dense as fat and protein. But what actually occurred is we didn't reduce fat. We kept the fat intake the same. We just started eating more carbohydrates as a result, which obviously wasn't the thing that was we were hoping for. The other thing that does contain calories that arguably is not essential would be alcohol. So alcohol would be 7 calories per gram, so kind of in the middle of protein, carb, and fat. And this is another one where I get a lot of people and they say, "Well, I was drinking beer, I switched it to clear spirit with diet soda to reduce my calories." The reality is, it doesn't matter what it is from an alcohol standpoint. It's the serving size. So it's kind of a misnomer I I talk to a lot of people about is if I'm drinking light beer and I switch that to, vodka diet, serving wise, same calories. The calories are in the alcohol, not necessarily the sugar, carbohydrate, any of that other stuff.
Got it. And we're going to have additional sessions that are sort of dedicated to those macronutrients, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. But could you maybe quickly just kind of tell us the difference in those and what they do for the body and what their functions are? So maybe let's start with protein.
Yeah. So protein, I mean, the biggest thing there is it's going to be made up of amino acids. So when we're eating something, chicken breast or whatever it is, our body breaks that down into amino acids. And those amino acids are most well known for repairing and rebuilding as well as immune function. So that's where that goes. As far as the other two, fat and carbohydrate, fat, we're breaking that down into fatty acids. And I think we all understand with fatty acids that gets stored with excess. So that would be our adipose tissue, as well as it protects and insulates organs. It helps with fat soluble vitamins. So we need fat to absorb, say, vitamin A or vitamin D. And then with carbohydrates, that is the body's preferred source of energy. So generally, when you're thinking of carbs, you're thinking of sugar, starch, and fiber. Now, all carbohydrates really accept fiber, which isn't absorbable, at least in the context of what we think of. The gut microbiome does some cool things there. But with carbohydrates, basically, they all end up as glucose. And again, that would be the preferred source of energy for the body as far as making ATP, which I'm sure maybe we'll get into a little bit.
Yeah, excellent. So we are going to have some future sessions that are dedicated to each of those because I think that they're, I mean, really, we could talk for hours about each of those different
Good.
topics. And so eventually we will. But for now, that's a great summary, Jason. Really appreciate that. Let's talk about how our body actually uses the calorie. So after we consume the food and we have the calorie, what do we do with that?
Yeah. Well, let's, I guess, take each of those independently, maybe. So let's say we're eating carbohydrates. Our body's breaking down those carbohydrates. So from the bread or the potato or whatever it is, it's breaking down those carbohydrates in the small intestine. That's where the glucose gets absorbed into the bloodstream. So the glucose from that piece of bread essentially can then go to the tissues, or it can be go to the different organs where it's needed. The other sugars, generally fructose, would then go to the liver, and that's where eventually it goes through some pathways, and then it can be released and used as energy in other sources. But at the end of the day, we need glucose. That's our body's preferred currency when it comes to carbohydrate. We can't use fructose or other monosaccharides. So that's what happens with that carbohydrate. Again, fat similar, but we're breaking down those fatty acids, and that's getting absorbed into the bloodstream. Similar thing with protein, breaking down that protein into those amino acids, and that's where it goes to the liver. And kind of depending on what we're doing and our needs, it's going to get shuttled into the different areas of the body as well. So at the end of the day, they're all being digested, absorbed. The pathways they take after that absorption is a little bit different. And then really how they're used is really dependent on diet as well as activity level, amongst other factors.
So they all sort of have a different role in the grand scheme of things, but I think when people think about it, they think about one universal implication of calories, and that's weight gain and weight loss. So how do you see the relationship of calories and weight?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we understand undoubtedly is if I am intaking more calories, really from any source than what my body needs or requires, we're not robots. So those excess calories we will store is body fat, is adipose tissue. And it makes sense. I mean, if you go back through human history, is we necessarily getting calories was a hard job. It's never been easier than any other time in history than today. I can go to the drive-through or go to the vending machine, but not that long ago that wasn't a reality. So if I'm eating more calories from any source than I am using, my body will store that kind of as a protective measure to say, well, I got more now. It's plentiful. I don't know where my calories are coming from next week. So I'm going to store this. So in case of hard times, I have that energy that my body can fall back on, when I'm not able to find calories. And then the opposite would be true if I'm intaking less than my body needs. Essentially what happens is the body says, well, I still need 2000 calories for what I'm doing. I'm going to take that difference that I'm not eating, and I will take that from what I have available. And that's generally how weight loss occurs. So my body then uses that triglyceride or fatty acids that would be available, as well as some lean tissue, again, depending on intensity, activity, as well as overall dietary makeup.
And then beyond weight gain, I think that there are probably some other negative consequences of eating too many calories. So, can you tell us what some of those may be other than weight gain?
Yeah, well, and I think acutely, we're probably thinking of, I mean, in a very short term, there would be things like potentially a spike in blood glucose, which in itself is not problematic, but when that becomes reoccurrent, it increases the risk of things like insulin resistance. Um, Fatigue is another one. If you're thinking of I'm eating, large meals throughout the day, my body's using that blood that could be used elsewhere, and now it's focusing it on digestion and absorbing all of those nutrients, as well as maybe even shorter term things like indigestion. Anyone that's had a heavy fat meal, especially, experiences that, and or even interrupting sleep. We know if I'm eating too much, especially in those later parts of the day, again, you're lying down, your body's trying to prioritize digestion, absorption, and now you're trying to lay down and go to sleep, probably interfering with sleep. Those would all be very common short-term issues to eating more than maybe what is the requirement. I think longer term, when you're thinking of beyond weight gain, and a lot of these things would be related to weight gain, obviously, but an increased risk of things like type 2 diabetes, certain cancer, high blood pressure, the list goes on and on.
Yeah, and reduce lifespan, increase mortality, a lot of things there as well. Well, what about let's flip that. What are some of the short and long term consequences of eating too few calories? So,
Yeah.
other than weight loss, what are some of the consequences of too few calories?
Yeah, and I think it's kind of just in some ways the opposite of what we just explained. But again, fatigue simply from the lack of fuel. When you're thinking of calories as kind of the currency of energy, if I'm not giving my body enough fuel, we would expect a reduction in energy levels or fatigue happening. Things like irritability. So I guess this could be the hangry episode where if my blood glucose is too low, you're probably going to have a little bit shorter of a fuse. Things like constipation, if I'm not getting enough fiber for one, that's obviously going to be a pretty acute issue that's going to happen pretty quick. And then as well as there's some research for this as maybe impaired cognitive function. Again, knowing that calories, especially glucose, are the source of energy, especially for the brain, potentially kind of that acute, maybe a little bit reduction in cognition. As far as longer term, I think this is where you're going to start to see more of the chronic things. So muscle loss. If I'm not getting enough energy, especially those amino acids, my body's going to prioritize getting energy from what I have available. We will lose muscle tissue. That's a very common phenomenon, both in athletes as well as older individuals, as well as if I'm in a severe calorie restriction. Nutritional deficiencies. So think of things like anemia or bone loss. Again, if I'm not fueling my body and giving it what it needs, it will get it from somewhere. That somewhere will be other parts of the body. Weakened immune system. We do know if I'm not intaking enough calories, immunity is going to be reduced, which just makes myself more susceptible to illness and disease, as well as impacting hormones negatively. So everything from menstrual cycles to females to even fertility. Perhaps. So all of those are real things that can occur if I'm chronically underfueling.
That was an excellent summary. And what I want to point out to the audience is, we think about calories and weight. Like our mind immediately goes to weight, sort of automatically, but it really impacts every domain of performance: cognitive performance, physical performance, athletics, sleep, nutrition, emotional regulation, relationships, productivity, judgment, really
100.
everything. And I think so that's sort of a quick call out. One is like it affects more than just your weight, number one. And then number two, it has impacts if you're on the too high side, too many calories, and also on the too low side. So I think that highlights that we really this is important. We have to get this right, not just for our weight, but really for sort of all domains of performance. And the goal is not just less or not just more, it's balance, as it is with so many things. Well, good. That was incredibly helpful, Jason, and I appreciate that. Let's transition into our second big question. So, the second question today is, why do people misunderstand calories, and why is it so hard to get it right? And I think this is fairly loaded question. It's unique to all of us. We all have our own problems, but we'll start with you. You got a lot of experience in this. What are some of the most common misconceptions you've seen that people have about calories and weight loss?
Yeah, I think probably two of the biggest ones that I hear day in and day out is number one, calories don't matter. Calories not it's not a calorie. It's the quality of food. So I'm not worried about calories. I'm worried about what I'm eating. So it's not necessarily the how much, but the what. Another one is kind of the opposite of that. Is basically it's the calories. The quality doesn't matter at all. Why am I worried about that? I'm worried about this number, the calories. So those are, two ends of the spectrum that I hear all day, every day. Another one that's common is, well, it's not calories, it's the time. So I'm not worried about calories. It's the time that I'm eating that I think is the most impactful, or the most that's the biggest lever to pull. All of those are just a little bit displaced in terms of what the reality is. But those are arguably probably the three biggest things I hear most days of, why calories are confusing.
With you talking about that concept of, how many calories is more important, or the nutritional value of the things I'm eating is more important, it brings the concept of value up to me. So anytime we think about value, there's an equation for that. So value is sort of the product or outcome you're getting divided by the cost, which is true in business or anywhere else in the world. And we all want high value. We want high value. We want a lot of product or a lot of outcome for a reduced cost. And to put that in nutrition terms, I often think about that as the nutrition divided by calories. So the nutritional benefits we get, meaning the vitamins, minerals, proteins, building blocks, et cetera, the good things we get out of food, divided by the calories that it costs. So obviously you want things that are higher nutritional value per calorie spent. In light of what you just said, is it fair to think of it that way, or is that an oversimplification as well?
I think both. So, I mean, when we're looking at it, I would argue there's no good or bad food. I can have a wonderful dietary pattern and still include things that most people would consider unhealthy. I think from that standpoint, what we're looking at though is, at the end of the day, when it comes to the biggest bang for your buck, what we see is going to be those more whole foods. So, I mean, basically, you're on processed foods now. Again, and even with processed foods, there's is the categories. There's basically four different categories of processed food. But at the end of the day, if I can eat mostly whole foods, limit my processed food, you're without a doubt, you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck from a nutrition standpoint, and as a result, from a health standpoint.
So tell me, while we're talking about processed food and nutritional value, the term empty calories, what does that mean to you when you hear it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, generally, when you're thinking of empty calories, it would be foods that are very high calories, so generally high fat, high sugar, but very low nutrition. So think of potato chips or soda. The opposite of that would be more nutrient dense foods, and these would be foods that are generally moderate to low calories, but also have a lot of nutrition. So think of something like a piece of salmon, or vegetables, or beans. So that's usually where what we see in the United States today. I mean, 60% of our intake, this is new numbers, 60% of our intake is coming from ultra processed foods, what we would say empty calories, which again is problematic from an overall health and wellness standpoint, as well as weight, as we're talking about.
One of my struggles, and I think struggle for everybody, is that I can understand calories, I can understand nutritional value, and I understand, how many I need. And I want to do a good job of that, but I also don't want to feel tired or hungry. So are those two desires compatible? Meaning I want to eat an appropriate amount of calories, but I do not want to be hungry. And I think
Sure.
that's probably a struggle for a lot of folks.
Well, and I think this is where, are they compatible? Yes. Now, again, but we have to understand, if I am taking in less calories than my body requires, there is going to be some level of maybe hunger increased, because if I'm taking in 1,500 calories and I need 2,000, for example, yeah, my body's going to push back a little bit by increasing appetite hormones. Now, with that being said, though, we can make this a heck of a lot more successful by focusing on these more nutrient dense foods that are more filling as well as lower calorie. So this is kind of where those two things coincide is we got to be in a calorie deficit in this example to lose weight, but the quality of food is going to be just as important from a long-term standpoint. Because if I'm just looking at numbers, I'll surely lose weight. But if I'm not eating those foods that are more filling, usually those things are the protein foods, the fibrous foods, the volume that helps to fill the stomach, those types of foods. So like fruits and vegetables. But if I'm not focused on those things, just focused on numbers, you will lose weight. You're probably going to gain it back because by definition, what I'm doing is not sustainable.
In that, I think also what I'm hearing you say is that, we hear this term calories in, calories out. That's really what matters when it comes to weight loss. You need to be in a deficit to lose weight or a surplus to gain weight. Calories in, calories out. A lot of people will say it's that simple, that's all that matters. And what I'm hearing you say is I think that the statement calories in, calories out is true, mostly true, but there is some nuance to that, and that quality is also important.
Yes, I tell people the calories are basically the king. I mean, if I am not in a calorie deficit, I will not lose weight. Doesn't matter what I'm eating. The opposite of that is true as well. If I'm not in a calorie surplus, my goal is weight gain, I will not gain weight. But within that, the nuance is I think from a long-term sustainability, and this is, it's not just I want to lose weight now, for the next month, but I want to lose weight and keep it off. Or I don't want to just gain weight now, but I want to gain weight and keep it on for the next, 4 years if I'm an athlete or whatever it might look like. But that's where it's got to be looked at from a standpoint of the habits and more so the quality of food. Um, and that's where I think people tend to, again, they focus on one or the other. And by doing that, you're kind of missing the bigger picture.
Earlier, you mentioned a little bit about timing of calories as one of the myths.
Mhm.
So I'd like to spend a little time on that. I'm going to give you a few phrases that I think get thrown out there quite a bit that lack some nuance and usually need clarity. So things like don't eat anything 2 hours before bed, no breakfast or first meal should not be until noon, or if you're going to consume protein, you have to do it, within 30 minutes of your workout. So there are all these timing phrases, probably
Yeah.
contain some truth, but maybe not the whole picture. Tell us a little bit about timing. How important is it? When should we be paying attention to it, and what role does that play?
Yeah, good question. I mean, at the end of the day, the timing is really, it's second fiddle to the total when it comes to weight gain, weight loss, weight maintenance, what have you. I think where there is some truth to some of those things. So let's say, I stop eating 2 hours before bed. I hear this most often, obviously, with people trying to lose weight. So I eat dinner at 6, 7 o'clock. I don't eat again, until the next morning. Um, which again, the body doesn't necessarily care when I'm eating. It doesn't know. But what that is doing is potentially reducing calories, especially for a lot of people. If I'm not eating after 7, well, I don't know a lot of people eating, broccoli and carrots at 8 o'clock at night. We're eating chips and ice cream and popcorn and all these things that are high calorie. So almost undoubtedly, yeah, you stop eating after 7, weight loss might occur because you're reducing a lot of those calories. It really had minimal to do with the time. It was kind of the reduction in total. Similar phenomenon with maybe more of the intermittent fasting, kind of as you're explaining. So, I wake up, I don't have breakfast, maybe I just have coffee black or what have you, and I get to lunch and that's when I break my fast. Again, research shows that's not good or bad necessarily. For a lot of people, that can be a way to reduce calories. It's not doing anything metabolically wise, it's not doing anything like that. But at the end of the day, my window is a little bit more narrower as far as my intake. So technically it can help reduce calories and as a result lose weight, and we see that in research. We have research people fast and other people track nutrition. At the end of a year, the weight loss is about the same. So it's not better or worse, depends on the person. I would say the caveat with both of those is, again, sustainability and what's going to work for that individual. What I do see not infrequently is people doing these, the fasting or maybe not eating after a certain time. Um, and the trade-off is increased hunger. And what can occur then is now, even though I fasted until noon, I eat and I am ravenous and I just overeat. And I have seen numerous examples of I'm fasting and I'm gaining weight. Well, again, it's still the total. So in that scenario, if you're finding yourself over hungry from fasting, arguably probably not the best approach for you. A better approach would be managing that appetite potentially by eating more frequently. Now, As far as the protein question, again, I think that's kind of an interesting and a pretty common one. Is I'm especially resistance training. I'm exercising. I got to get protein within an hour after working out. Otherwise, what's the point of it? And again, a little bit more nuanced. That's not harmful in any way, shape, or form. I would argue getting protein after working out is probably a easy rule of thumb to make sure we're getting enough protein. But there again, it is the total. And I made the same mistake when I was in high school. The reality of I was so focused on getting protein after working out, I kind of missed the bigger picture of how much I was getting total throughout the day. So, if you need 100 grams of protein and I have 30 after I work out, but for the day I'm only getting 70, it does not matter in the least that you had protein right after working out. You're still not going to get the results that you expect to see because your total is too low. So that's where ideally with protein, making sure I'm getting that number and ideally just evenly more distributing it for a couple different reasons. And then whether you have it after working out or not, I mean, if it's evenly distributed, it's kind of it's a moot point because most likely you've just eaten, lunch 2 hours ago. That protein from lunch could almost act like a protein post workout by the time the protein amino acids are ready. 2 hours later after working out. But regardless, you have that shake. You're just kind of covering your bases. So it's not good or bad. I think ultimately it can be a good rule of thumb, but we got to make sure we're getting the total right rather than just the timing when it comes to protein as well.
Great. So for both calories and the macronutrients, protein, carbs, fat, really priority number one is ensuring you get the right amount. That's the
Yeah.
king. And then after that, then you can maybe fine tune the timing a little bit, but that should be a secondary goal for people.
Yeah, 100%. And that's what I tell people. I mean, it's figuring out the amount, and then from there, I would say the quality and then the timing kind of in that hierarchy. That's where you're going to start to get the best results. I think people kind of go about it kind of the opposite. I have to have protein after working out. I'm not sure exactly how much I'm getting. Um, and then at the end of the day, you're short anyway, so you're not doing yourself any great favors.
Great. All right. Amount number one, quality number two, timing number three. I like that. It's a good priority system. Tell me about intuitive eating. I hear a lot of folks talking about this sort of my body knows what it wants to eat.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't, it has a certain amount of calories that it needs and craves, and it should just all work out.
Well, I'm hearing 2 different things in that statement. But when it comes to intuitive eating, I think especially now, I mean, I think the agreed upon idea of intuitive eating is more of this, at least if you're looking at literature, it'd be more of like this mindfulness of kind of our hunger fullness. So, how hungry am I? How full do I want to be? That type of thing, more like mindful eating. I think what we're blurring the lines today is this idea of intuitive eating. My body is deficient in something, so then it's craving that particular food. So what I see all over social media is, you don't, your body's not craving chocolate, you're deficient magnesium, so that's why your body wants this chocolate. um, I'll be honest, I'm a little bit skeptical. Now, there's research, kind of some small studies showing that. Again, going back to 1950, there's studies with younger kiddos that seems to show that phenomenon where they're deficient in this, and then they correct this deficiency, whether it's humans and animals. Like these cows are grazing on this particular patch of grass that has this particular mineral. But there's much more studies to refute that idea, as well as this thought of, I mean, if that was the case, why wouldn't my body crave other things high in those nutrients? So I'm deficient magnesium. Why is my body not saying, "Hey, feed me nuts"? So I think part of it is if you are deficient, and especially if you are in a severe calorie restriction, you're going to be craving things. Chances are the things you're craving are going to be high sugar, high fat, high calorie, because through human history, those were the things that would give us the biggest bang for our buck. So today, I'm still a little bit skeptical of, my body's deficient in iron, so I'm going to eat red meat. I think it's more of if my body's deficient, it's going to be looking for the biggest bang for its buck, which is admittedly the things that are high calorie, like chocolate or cheeseburgers.
We've talked a lot about consuming calories through food. We have not talked about burning calories through exercise. How big a factor is that? What is the relative impact on the total calorie balance of eating, burning through exercise?
Yeah. Well, and I think if you're looking at both of them independent, obviously you can't, human nature, but both of the independent, the biggest bang for your buck, the ones that's going to pay the biggest dividends would be the calories from food. And a couple reasons why. I mean, if you're looking at, let's say the goal is weight loss, and I'm saying I'm going to expend more calories, I'm going to go to the gym, I'm going to jump on this treadmill, I'm going to run for an hour. I mean, you run for an hour on that treadmill, maybe you burn 500 calories. That's an hour every single day, 7 days a week. I burn 500 calories. So, yes, that net expenditure would be an additional 500 calories. But now think of the repercussions of that. I'm expending more energy. My body is going to respond and say, I am hungry. And this is a phenomenon I see a lot, especially recreational athletes, marathon runners and things. I started training and I'm gaining weight. What is happening here? Well, I thought I was going to be losing weight. Most likely, what's occurring is you're increasing your activity. Your body's saying, "That's great. I'm hungry. Feed me." As well as the opposite of that, not the opposite, but along with that, saying, "Now I just ran for an hour," and it's the justification of saying, "Well, you ran for an hour. Let's swing by the Starbucks and let's get that big old macchiato or whatever it is." So you burn 500 calories. You get this drink that's 800. Obviously, the math doesn't quite math in that scenario. The other reality is it is generally easier to reduce calories from the intake than expend them. Again, if I'm trying to reduce 500 calories, it could be as long as I'm aware, I'm reducing portions at each meal. A little bit less here, I leave on the plate. I leave a little bit here. At the end of the day, 500 calories. Didn't even touch the treadmill. I'm in a 500 calorie deficit. Obviously, in a perfect world, we would be doing both. But at the end of the day, it really is the total intake. I think the other thing, just as a something to be aware of, is it seems like, and there's some research for this, that the human body really tightly regulates calorie expenditure. And I think this is this phenomenon where people say, if you're losing weight, the body does everything it can to hold on to weight. I would say, well, it kind of defies the laws of the universe. But what we do see is we get more active, it seems like over time, the body says, hey, that's cool. We're back on this treadmill, burning these calories. The joke's on you because now that we're in this calorie deficit, I don't have the energy. I'm a little bit tired. So the rest of the day, what you're going to find yourself is maybe I would go walk the dog. I'm kind of tired. I'm going to just relax. So it kind of, maybe subconsciously affects energy expenditure in that regard, where these things I were doing, I tend to reduce them a little bit. So now my net intake is not 500. Maybe now that I'm walking the dog less, my net intake or my net expenditure is only 200 calories. So that we got to factor that in as well. I tell people probably the easiest way to maybe circumnavigate that is step counting. So, you have a goal, regardless of how many, miles you run on the treadmill, your goal is still, whatever, 5,000 steps. Um, but yeah, the body does push back a little bit. So it's almost entirely going to be easier for 99% of us to say, okay, I'm going to focus on my diet, my intake. That's going to pay larger dividends for a multitude of reasons.
That's great, Jason, and I think you really hit the nail on the head there, and you're saying, there are benefits to exercise. You do need to be doing it. There's a lot of reasons we talk about that a
Yeah,
lot, but
absolutely.
when it comes to reducing the amount of calories, burning calories, and losing weight, you're gonna get a lot more return on your investment for reducing the amount you consume as opposed to trying to increase the amount you burn. Ideally, you do both, if
Ideally,
and you're in that situation.
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Well, let's transition into the third section here and let's start talking about some practical solutions, how we figure out how many calories we're supposed to have and how we actually stick to them. So, can you tell me what are the factors that impact my caloric needs? Is it just my height, weight, and activity level, or
Yeah.
what all goes into that?
Well, and again, when you think of calories, calories are energy, and it's the energy the body needs. So, from the simplest measure, your energy needs are calculated using your age, your height, your weight, your gender. So that's any calorie calculator equation. That's what they're looking at. Um, I mean, and the reality is, those equations are going to be fairly accurate for most people. There is a phenomenon where we do those equations. It says 1,500 calories, and the reality, if we did an actual measured calorie expenditure, it would be a little bit less. We don't have the answers for why, but that does occur. But at the end of the day, 9.5 out of 10 people, you do this equation, it's going to be close enough. And what those equations are figuring out is your metabolic need at rest. So if I laid in bed all day and basically didn't move, that would be my basal metabolic rate with those numbers: age, weight, height, gender. Now, the other things to keep in mind, and this is where calories can get a little bit gray, is if I'm not laying in bed, which most of us aren't all day long, now we got to factor in our movement. Both our movement, just I'm making coffee in the morning to sitting at the desk, so I'm not lying on my bed. But then also structured activity, which would be, I go to the gym, I walk the dog, so all of that factors in. And then the other component of total energy expenditure, which maybe isn't is thought of, would be actually the thermic effect of food. So it takes energy to break down, digest, and absorb food. So if you're thinking of your total calorie expenditure, it's basically age, height, weight, gender. On top of that, you add the thermic effect of food, and on top of that, you're adding your activity. So it can get a little bit messy.
Good. And tell us a little bit about how body composition plays into that. There's the phrase that muscle burns more than fat. And ideally, if you know body fat percentage and you know your muscle mass, you could probably get a little bit more accurate number. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes, 100%. So there's an equation that is used looking at lean tissue, and it's called the Cunningham equation. So that would be one if you, which more athletes probably know their lean body tissue than the average American. But if you know that, it would give you a little bit more of a targeted number rather than this is how much you weigh to your height, not taking into consideration any lean tissue. So there are a lot of different equations. That Cunningham would be the one if I know my lean tissue. The other most common ones are the Harris Benedict, which a lot of times like clinics will use that. Another one would be the Mifflin St. Jeor, which again, a little bit maybe a little bit more accurate to the active individual, maybe not as accurate as the Cunningham. I mean, they'll all get you close. They're not all going to be 100% accurate. They'll all get you close, and then it's just kind of fine tuning it as you see fit.
And I think for most people, for their goals, any of these are going to work. They're going to get you the answers that you want. But if you're one of those like super heavy type A people who needs the precision, you can go online, you can look at all these different calculators, you can try each of them and sort of see what the differences are, average across them, and that'll give you. So that's another option for
Yeah,
those that
yeah,
require that precision in their calculations.
absolutely. Yeah.
So is calorie counting the best strategy for everyone who's looking to maintain weight, lose weight, or gain weight?
Um, Everyone, I would say no. I mean, it depends on the person. I would say individuals that maybe have a history of like an eating disorder, I would steer away from. Obviously, someone that maybe they're understanding their own personality and saying this can go sideways on me pretty quick. I would say, yeah, let's focus on other measures. We don't have to even mention calories. Now, the typical person that's not the case and you're looking at a just to raise awareness, I would say tracking nutrition is probably the most effective thing that you can do to get a better sense of which direction you're going, whether it's weight loss, weight maintenance, weight gain. Simply because it's not intuitive how much we eat. I mean, if you asked me, I could give you an estimate, I wouldn't know the exact. Where if I start to track that, now all of a sudden, the rubber meets the road, and it's just much more objective what the actual reality is.
Now, how do we try? So let's say we're one of those people where maybe we're looking to lose a little bit of weight or maybe gain a little weight either way, and we haven't tried this yet. And we say, all right, I'm actually I want to get this right this time. How do I track my calories?
Yeah. I mean, you could look at it old school, you could pen and paper. Obviously, there's going to be some amount of error there, most likely, but some people appreciate that. They'd rather do it that way than use technology, which is fine. Technology will be probably the more efficient, effective way, and research shows that. And yeah, it could be as simple as, I mean, you can look up the equations and do it on a piece of paper, which, or easier, you could just simply type in BMR calculator or Mifflin St. Jeor calculator or Cunningham equation calculator, and it'll give you the calculator. You plug in your information, age, height, weight, gender, maybe lean body percentage if you know it, if you're doing the Cunningham, and it will spit out a number. It'll spit out 1,500 calories. And then from there, you just got to kind of figure out your activity. And that's kind of that X factor of, okay, how active am I? And they have activity factors. If you're sedentary, you would take your basal metabolic rate times 1.2. If you're active 7 days a week, it would be 1.8 or whatever that activity factor would be. And you land on a number. Using your phone, we have tracking apps that do just this, where you plug in your information, spits out a number, and then you essentially just put in your food for the day. It adds it all up. Um, so it's never been easier than it is today, I would argue. But that doesn't make it 100%, foolproof. I'll say that.
And how do you suggest people when they start doing this? So I'm gonna write down all my calories that I'm consuming in a day, or I'm gonna put them in an app, whatever. Um, how give me a couple practical tips or some wisdom that you give folks when they start. You recommend do they do it every day with each meal? Wait till the end of the day?
Yeah, good
What are some
question.
of the logistical steps?
I mean, as research shows, if I'm doing this, accuracy is going to be critical. And what the same research shows is accuracy is going to be determined on doing it consistently every day, as well as in close proximity to when the food was eaten, which can be kind of a pain for some people, right? If I every time I'm eating lunch, I got to bring out my phone. But I mean, if I wait till the end of the day, we'll probably get the foods correct. I know, okay, for breakfast I had Cheerios. What we're probably gonna, fudge on, whether we're, purposely or not, is the portion sizes, the serving, which is half a tracking. Um, and this is where I think, we see this a lot is, people are tracking, they're not getting results, and they say, "Gosh, there must be something, wrong with me. My metabolism is broke or something. I don't know. I'm not losing weight." And almost always, it's just they're a little bit inaccurate and they're just off by enough. I mean, it doesn't take much. If I think I'm eating, 300 calories in a deficit, but I missed, instead of 3 ounces of chicken, it was five, and instead of 8 ounces of milk, it was 10. Something like that. I'm maintaining weight just with those two inaccuracies, and we see that. We put these people in a metabolic chamber, and we measure everything to the nth degree, give them exactly these calories, and weight loss occurs. So yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, accuracy is going to be paramount, and from there it would be close proximity to eating, as well as just trying to be aware of portions. We don't have to be 100% exact, but if I am not close or off a little bit all day long, results aren't going to happen.
I like the way you position that too, and you really need to base on the results you're getting. If what you're doing is giving you the results you want, then that it's working for you, and that's
100%.
fine to do. If it's not, though, take another look, and your numbers are off, your measurements are off, something is off in your math. It's unlikely a problem with physics or metabolism. It's probably a math problem somewhere. You didn't measure the right or count
Yeah.
the right amount. So I would encourage people. I think when you're doing this early on, be very precise, and you probably don't have the experience to be making guesses and estimates, and you probably actually do need to really measure things out at least early on until you get some familiarity with the portion sizes.
Yeah, 100%. That's what I encourage people is, try to be as exact as you can. You don't have to lose sleep over it. But I mean, just by doing that, and not only will you get better results, but you'll have more of a better understanding of what serving sizes actually look like for future.
And another tip that I've found helpful for me is I've done this in the past is if you're eating new meals every single day, that is a lot more work. And so one of the ways this has become easier is that you have a few sort of go-to meals, particularly for breakfast and lunch, that I know what this meal is, I know what it contains, I know what the calories are, I know what the macros are, and I'm just putting that in the rotation. And
Yeah.
so that's a way to I know every time I eat meal X, this is what it has, and then I don't have to redo the calculation. So having some consistency, not to say you have to be boring, having some consistencies in your meals can reduce the amount of math and manual calculations you have to do. So that's one tip that I've learned along the way.
Yeah, 100%.
Another thing I've struggled with in the past, Jason, is that when I've done this and I've tracked my calories, I know that if I go over on a day, I often have this sort of doomsday. Well, I've blown it now. Might as well have another slice of cake,
Yeah.
sort of mentality. Do you see that very often? I've come up with some tricks to try to get around it, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. Well, yeah, 100%. I see that all day long. I think it's that all or nothing mentality where it's human nature, right? And I think this is where we have to be, understanding and give ourselves grace and be flexible. Because I tell people it's the average, and you're going to go over. That is expected. That's fine. That's not the end of the world. The problem is if I'm going over consistently most days of the week, then obviously I'm not going to get results. But I mean, even going over, it can show us a couple things. You can look at it objectively and say, well, what happened? And maybe you went over because that was Thursday, and Thursdays you go to happy hour with your coworkers or something. So we don't have to change that habit, but maybe now when I go to happy hour, I start to change some of those things I'm doing. So maybe I have, one drink instead of two, or maybe instead of having this appetizer, I switched out for this one. So now continuing to track, what you see is, oh yeah, on that particular day I was over by 500. Now I'm about even. I would say perfect. Now we've started to change habits because we're more aware. You're going to still get good results, but also we're not, shutting yourself in and saying, I give up kind of deal. And then it's also the average. I mean, just because you're over today, getting back on track, you can still lose weight. And I tell people too, like, there's certain instances where maybe tracking isn't, maybe isn't warranted. So maybe I'm going on vacation or it's Christmas or a holiday or something. And hopefully by then I have these habits instilled that I can keep up with my lifestyle. But there again, maybe the goal is not weight loss over my vacation, it's weight maintenance. So a little bit more flexible, but it's also not, I'm going to go, crazy. I'm going to eat chocolate cake for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Understanding I can fit those things in and still have an enjoyable time, but also, that's not my reality every single day.
One of the things that actually helped me, one strategy among many, I think that'll work for different people is that I knew that about myself that I would tend to do it. If I went over, then I'd just kind of blow the day off and go wild. And so I started looking at a 7-day average. So
Yeah.
rather than seeing how many I needed every day and being beholden to it that day, I knew, okay, here's how many calories I need for the week. I don't want to go over that. And so if I went over a little bit today, I knew that I could make up for it tomorrow. And that encouraged me that if I went over today, I still wanted to stay in the game because I knew I was
Yeah.
going to make up for it tomorrow. And the more I blow it today, the harder I have to work tomorrow. So that was one little trick that helped me is that rather than just looking at my daily calorie total, I looked at my weekly calorie total.
Yeah.
So that sort of helped for me.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So what about long term? Is this something that I have to do forever? If I want to, lose
Well,
weight off, do I have
it,
to keep measuring these things every single meal for the rest of my life?
I tell people that shouldn't be the goal. I mean, obviously, right? I don't want to be tracking for the next 50 years of my life, huh? But I think ultimately what we're looking at is tracking in the midterm can get us closer to our results. But more than that, I would say tracking the biggest benefit is that awareness, because through tracking you start to see some trends, and then you start to see. I mean, you're just getting more aware. Oh, this is what 2,000, whatever the goal is, 2,000 calories looks like for me and the foods that I eat. So eventually tracking, I tell people, should get repetitive because you're learning, your current habits and routines. And eventually you're just getting to the point, yeah, okay, 2,000 calories today, or, whatever the goal is. Now, I think where I tell people it can be beneficial is maybe we don't just cast tracking aside forever. Is, maybe we get to our goal, right? I've lost my 25 pounds or I've gained my 10 pounds, whatever it is. Now maybe I have a trigger point. So my trigger point is I've lost 25 pounds. Um, once I start to see my weight come up consistently, so maybe my trigger is 3 to 5 pounds. So I'm consistently 3 to 5 pounds over my goal weight. Maybe that's a indicator that I start tracking again, because what that's telling me, oh gosh, yeah, something's just a little bit off kilter. So let's get a hold of this, before it gets too far along. But yeah, the goal should not be lifelong tracking. But I think there's also times where tracking, coming back to it, revisit it, can kind of reestablish some of that awareness.
You're making me feel better actually, because I don't track every day, and I've sort of done that with the trigger point, and I kind of have a weight that I try to maintain, and if I'm 0 to 5 pounds over that weight, I say, "Oh, I better gotta watch out, be a little bit
Yeah.
careful here," and I still, weigh myself, regularly. If I get 5 to 10 pounds over that number, then I say, "Okay, now I'm gonna start tracking to get back on the good side of that." So I've used that. That's been incredibly helpful for me, but we're talking about turning this into a healthy habit, and much of what we talk about on the Human Optimization Project is making these habits sort of your new baseline so that they don't
Mhm.
require a lot of effort and energy and that they do become easy. And I think just like anything, the more you do this, it changes behavior, it aligns your behavior with the healthy habit, and it does become easier over time. and it becomes automatic. So you'll find that as you do it more and more, you get more knowledgeable, you get used to it, you get that direct feedback. It's an educational process. And then it becomes much easier in the future. It's just like budgeting your finances. If you've never done it, it's really challenging early on. But if you're somebody who's been budgeting your finances for years, you understand where your money is going and
Yeah.
what you want to do with it. So writing it down is immensely valuable because not only does it give you the results, but it also helps modify your behavior and make it easy. And we also talk a lot about having satisfaction in the process. And this is a great way for people to have satisfaction in the process of losing weight or gaining weight, whatever your goal is. Oftentimes we want the scale to be our goal. And, I'm not going to be happy until I've lost that 20 pounds, which is not the best way to approach it, in my opinion. You have to find ways to be satisfied in the process. And here's a way you can say, hey, 5 days in a row, I just hit my calorie target. Like I'm happy about that. I'm gonna celebrate. I'm gonna allow myself
Yeah.
to rejoice. So, Jason, this is great. You've provided us with a lot of wisdom and thoughtful insight and really practical tips. I'm gonna kind of, as we wrap up here, I'm gonna call out some of the biggest learning facts for me and sort of the biggest surprises. I think we all tend to think about calories as they relate to weight gain and weight loss, but you did a really nice job of highlighting how calories really affect everything: our physical performance, our health, our athletic performance, our sleep, our ability to exercise, our relationships, our decision making. So we need to not think about it just as weight. We need to think about it really impacting all levels of human performance. And in reality, going too having too many calories is detrimental. Too few is also detrimental. So we have to find that sweet spot. And
Yeah.
I also liked what you talked about on sort of the priorities of what you should focus on, and that number one, the number of calories is the most important factor when it comes to weight loss and weight gain. The second most important is probably quality of your food when it comes to weight loss, weight gain. And then third is timing. So it's not to say that timing of food doesn't have a role at all, but it's just not nearly as impactful as the overall amount and quality, and that should be the main emphasis. And then lastly, I think you did a great job of talking about how we figure out what our caloric needs are, how we meet those, and then that tracking can then become a habit, not necessarily something we have to do forever. So those were all great take home points for me. We started this thing out with three big questions and I think you've answered all of them quite nicely, but I'm going to give you a chance to hit each one of them once again. So our first question: what are calories and why do they matter?
Yeah. Well, again, calories, it's just a unit of a measure. We're measuring energy. Um, and with that, especially with the body, I mean, if I'm eating too much energy, I will gain weight. If I'm eating too little energy, I will lose weight. And that's kind of the whole story when it comes to calories.
Why do people often misunderstand calories, and why is it so hard to get it right?
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing is it can be frustrating. It's not, I mean, it is an exact science, but in free living conditions, there's a lot of gray. So I think that's where obviously, especially tracking is a tool. But what we want to do is couple that with habit changes, kind of as you were so nicely stating. So at the end of the day, calories is going to be the main factor, but we want to reinforce those habits of how can I get in a deficit and do it day to day in a way that's sustainable, or how can I get in a surplus and do it day to day that would be realistic. Um, and ultimately, it's going to be a little bit of trial and error. It's going to take a little bit of time. And I think that's where people get frustrated. They want instant results. It's still that math equation. It's going to take a little bit of time, but if I can do that consistently and sustainably, we will reach our results. We'll reach our goals.
And then what can I do to figure out my caloric needs and actually stick to them?
Yeah. Well, I think the probably the easiest way is to find a calculator online or on your phone. And then based off your goal, what weight loss or weight gain, I think sticking to them, that's where you got to be realistic. If the goal is weight loss, you want to be in a calorie deficit large enough to see weight loss, but not large enough where I'm going to be completely restricted and depriving myself and miserable.
And
Same.
roughly what is that deficit for most
Yeah,
people?
good question.
What you're mentioning.
Yeah, so what we understand is a pound of weight is about 3,500 calories. So what that means is if I want to lose a pound over the course of 7 days, I would have to be in a 500 calorie a day deficit. So that's kind of where those numbers arise from. If I want to lose a half a pound, roughly 250 calorie deficit a day. the opposite of that when it comes to weight gain. So we generally encourage, keeping it around a half to no more than 2 pounds, both to the goal of loss or gain. Again, depends on the person. The smaller I am, the larger that deficit, the lower amount I'm able to eat. At some point, that becomes unsustainable. So I really try to encourage people to be realistic and just understand expectations. I mean, if I have someone that is fairly smaller stature, your calorie goal for the day might only be 1,600 calories. So the idea that I'm going to all of a sudden lose 2 pounds in a week, I mean, can we do it? Yes. Is it going to be sustainable? Probably not. So again, we just expectations.
Realistic goals and expectations. That's one of the secret sauces to life.
Yeah.
So we always like to give a challenge or a call to action at the end, just to try to move you from being a passive learner to an active learner who starts putting these things in action. So this one I think is very straightforward, but I'm going to give you three things that I want you to do. So number one, if you've never figured out what your calorie needs are, I want you to take a guess first. So guess what you think they are. Write it down, then go calculate it online. He mentioned a bunch of calculators. You can try any of them, all of them if you want. So then actually calculate it. But I want you to guess first, then actually go calculate it. So that's challenge number one. Challenge number two is I want you to guess how many calories you think you eat in a day and write that number down, then actually track them for a week. And then as you do it, I want you to track them, try to be accurate. Watch how your behavior changes just in that first week. Just the simple act of measuring and tracking will probably have a surprising impact on your behavior. And then, third, when you meet your calorie goal, whatever it is, for 5 days in a row, 7 days in a row, celebrate. Allow yourself the chance to be proud, to see that you've made forward progress. I wouldn't celebrate with pie or ice cream or a donut, so have a non-caloric celebration of some sort, to feel proud that you've done it, and then see how that feels, and then keep moving forward. Okay, optimizers, there you have it. Jason Ewald just did a wonderful job of walking us through our session today, which was titled Understanding Calories, what they are, what they do, and how to get them right. This is a great discussion, Jason. I really appreciate your time and your expertise. Thank you so much for walking us through this today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And to our audience, thank you for joining us. As always, remember to live intentionally, consistently better. Keep striving to be the best human you can be and never stop optimizing. Thank you very much.